McDonald's janitor fed a starving dragon hatchling, not knowing it was the Emperor's son. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Blake Turner wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he pushed the mop across the McDonald's kitchen floor. The midnight shift was always the loneliest, with only the occasional drunk customer stumbling in for a late-night burger. His McDonald's uniform shirt was stained with various condiments, badges of honor from a long night's work. The sound of clattering in the back alley caught Blake's attention. Probably raccoons again, he thought, sighing as he propped his mop against the wall. The manager had specifically told him to keep the critters away from the dumpsters. Health inspectors were particularly fussy about that sort of thing. Blake pushed open the back door. The cool night air a welcome relief from the greasy kitchen atmosphere. The security light flickered ominously, casting strange shadows across the alleyway. He approached the dumpster cautiously, wielding the broom he'd grabbed on his way out like a spear. "All right, get out of there," he called, tapping the metal side of the dumpster with the broom handle. "Come on, I don't have all night." A strange, warbling chirp answered him. Blake frowned. That wasn't a raccoon. Cautiously, he lifted the dumpster lid and peered inside. Among the discarded burger wrappers and paper bags, something moved. Something small, scaly, and definitely not a raccoon. "What the?" Blake muttered, leaning in for a closer look. Two luminous eyes stared back at him, glowing with an inner light that was decidedly unnatural. The creature was roughly the size of a house cat, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and emerald green, depending on how the light hit them. A pair of stubby wings lay flat against its back, and a long, tapering tail curled around its body protectively. "Well, aren't you the weirdest lizard I've ever seen?" Blake said, reaching into the dumpster. The creature hissed, baring needle-sharp teeth, but the threatening display was somewhat undermined by the pitiful growl that emanated from its belly. Blake chuckled. "Hungry, huh? Wait here," as if the creature had anywhere else to go. He returned to the kitchen, quickly assembling a plate of burger patties that were about to be tossed out due to sitting too long under the heat lamp. When he returned to the dumpster, the strange reptile was still there, watching him with those unervingly intelligent eyes. "Here you go, little buddy," Blake said, placing the plate at the edge of the dumpster. "It's not five-star cuisine, but it'll fill your belly." The creature approached cautiously, sniffing at the meat. Then, with surprising delicacy, it began to eat, making small chirping sounds that Blake interpreted as satisfaction. "You're welcome," he said, smiling despite himself. "I'm Blake, by the way. Blake Turner, McDonald's janitor extraordinaire." The creature looked up at him, tilting its head curiously. For a moment, Blake could have sworn there was understanding in those eyes. "You know, you kind of look like a dragon," he mused. "A tiny dragon. Is that what you are? Some kind of exotic pet someone dumped?" The creature chirped again, finishing the last of the burger patties with surprising speed. "Still hungry?" Blake asked, then shrugged. "Tell you what, I'll bring you some more tomorrow night. You just stay out of trouble, okay?" As Blake walked back into the restaurant, he failed to notice the sleek, black aircraft hovering silently above the McDonald's, its stealth technology rendering it invisible to human eyes and radar alike. Inside the craft, General Nexus of the Imperial Dragon Forces glared at the monitoring screen. "Confirm visual," he demanded, his reptilian features rigid with tension. "Is it the prince?" The technician beside him nodded, adjusting the resolution on the thermal imaging display. "Biorhythm signature confirmed, sir." "That's Prince Dracos." Nexus hissed softly, razor-sharp teeth glinting in the dim light of the command console. "What is that human doing with His Highness?" "It appears to be feeding him, sir," the technician replied, sounding just as confused as Nexus felt. "Feeding him what?" The technician adjusted the scanner. "Processed animal protein. Some form of cooked meat patty." Nexus narrowed his eyes. "Is it poisoned?" "No detectable toxins, sir." "Then why would the human feed him? What does it gain?" The technician hesitated. "I don't know, sir. Perhaps it's attempting to domesticate His Highness? Humans keep smaller animals as companions. Nexus snorted, a small jet of flame briefly illuminating the command center. Absurd. The prince is not some common pet. He is the heir to the galactic dragon empire. He turned to his second-in-command. Prepare a retrieval team. We'll extract His Highness immediately. His second-in-command, Commander Valix, stepped forward. Sir, with respect, we can't risk an open intervention. The Emperor's orders were clear. No contact with humans until the Diplomatic Council makes its final assessment. If we reveal ourselves now. Nexus growled low in his throat, but Valix was right. The Emperor had been explicit. Earth was under evaluation for potential inclusion in the Galactic Alliance, but any premature contact could jeopardize the entire process. And with tensions already high among the Council members regarding humanity's worthiness. Fine, Nexus conceded. We maintain surveillance. But if that human harms one scale on the prince's body, evaluation protocols be damned. We'll reduce this entire structure to ash. Valix nodded. Understood, sir. But how did the prince even end up here? He was supposed to be safe in the diplomatic quarters on the mothership. Nexus sighed, a wisp of smoke escaping his nostrils. His Highness has always been curious about humans. Too curious. He must have escaped during the last rotation cycle and somehow made his way to the surface. He shook his head. His father will have my scales for this. Back inside the McDonald's, Blake was finishing up his shift, mind still on the strange creature in the dumpster. He'd always been a sucker for strays, much to the annoyance of his landlord, who had only reluctantly agreed to let him keep the 3 cats he'd already rescued. But this was different. That wasn't just some stray cat or dog. That was something else entirely. As Blake hung up his apron and clocked out, he made a mental note to bring some better food tomorrow, maybe some chicken, and perhaps a small box to transport the creature in. He couldn't leave it in the dumpster indefinitely, and his apartment, small as it was, would be better than an alley. What he didn't realize was that his simple act of kindness had just placed him at the center of a galactic diplomatic incident. Over the next few days, Blake fell into a routine. Each night during his shift, he'd save the best scraps from the kitchen, chicken nuggets, burger patties, sometimes even the fancy limited-time offerings, and take them out to the creature, which he'd started calling Ember, due to the way its scales sometimes seemed to glow with an inner fire. By the 3rd night, Ember was waiting for him, chirping excitedly when Blake opened the back door. By the 5th night, the creature allowed Blake to stroke its head, making a sound that was remarkably similar to a cat's purr. And by the end of the week, Blake had fashioned a makeshift carrier from a cardboard box and was ready to take Ember home. Come on, buddy, Blake said, holding out a chicken nugget. Time to go to your new home. Ember regarded the box suspiciously, but the lure of the chicken nugget proved too strong. The creature hopped inside, and Blake quickly closed the lid, leaving it open just enough for air. Trust me, you'll like my place better than a dumpster, Blake assured the box as he walked to his car. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean, and there's a heater. You look like you might appreciate that, being a reptile and all. In the Imperial surveillance craft, alarm sirens blared. Sir, the human is moving the prince, the technician reported, panic evident in his voice. Nexus leapt from his command chair, tail lashing dangerously. Where? To what purpose? Unknown, sir. He's placed His Highness in some sort of container and is transporting him in a primitive combustion engine vehicle. Track them, Nexus ordered. Do not lose visual contact. As Blake's battered Honda Civic pulled away from the McDonald's parking lot, the invisible surveillance craft followed, maintaining a discreet distance while its sensors remained locked on the precious cargo in Blake's passenger seat. Blake's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a worn-down building in a part of town that estate agents generously described as up and coming. It had been up and coming for the better part of 2 decades, but Blake didn't mind. The rent was cheap, and the landlord mostly left him alone as long as he paid on time. He carried the box carefully up the stairs, mindful of the occasional shifting and chirping from within. When he finally reached his apartment and closed the door behind him, he set the box gently on the living room floor. Welcome home, Ember, he said, opening the box. Ember poked his head out cautiously, those luminous eyes taking in the new surroundings. After a moment, the creature emerged fully, wings slightly extended as it explored its new environment. Blake's 3 cats watched from a distance, a mixture of curiosity and wariness in their postures. The largest, an orange tabby named Rusty, hissed softly, but made no move to approach the newcomer. "Be nice, guys," Blake admonished. Ember's had a rough time. Ember chirped at the sound of his name, then continued his exploration, sniffing at the furniture and occasionally pawing at interesting objects. When he reached the bookshelf, he seemed particularly fascinated by Blake's small collection of fantasy novels, many featuring dragons on their covers. "Yeah, you see that?" Blake chuckled. "You're not the first dragon I've met. Just the first real one." Ember tilted his head, then made a sound that was almost like laughter. Blake raised an eyebrow. "You understand me, don't you? You're a lot smarter than you're letting on." In response, Ember chirped and fluttered his wings, landing gracefully on Blake's shoulder. The creature was heavier than he looked, and Blake staggered slightly before regaining his balance. Okay, make yourself at home," he said, gently lifting Ember off his shoulder and placing him on the couch. "I need to get ready for bed. Some of us have to work for a living, you know." As Blake went through his nightly routine, shower, teeth brushing, setting his alarm for the following evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a very strange turn. He'd always been an ordinary guy, not particularly successful, not particularly ambitious. Just a guy trying to make ends meet with a janitor's salary and a penchant for taking in strays. But Ember wasn't just another stray. Ember was something else entirely. Something that possibly shouldn't exist. "What am I going to do with you?" Blake murmured as he emerged from the bathroom to find Ember curled up on his pillow, already fast asleep. Careful not to wake the creature, Blake slid into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd do some research. Try to figure out exactly what Ember was and where he might have come from. For now, though, sleep beckoned. In the darkness outside Blake's apartment, the Imperial surveillance craft hovered, its sensors penetrating the building's walls to monitor the prince's vital signs. "His Highness appears to be sleeping, sir," the technician reported. Nexus frowned. "And the human? Also sleeping. No signs of aggression or ill intent detected." "This makes no sense," Nexus muttered. "Why would the human take the prince into its dwelling? What does it want?" Commander Valix cleared his throat. "Sir, I've been analyzing the human's behavior patterns. This isn't the first non-human entity it has sheltered. There are 3 feline creatures also residing in the dwelling. So the human collects alien species?" Nexus's voice dripped with disdain. "Not alien to Earth, sir. Domestic felines are common human companions. What I'm suggesting is that perhaps the human's motives are benevolent. It may genuinely believe it is helping a creature in need." Nexus snorted. "Helping? The prince is the heir to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. He doesn't need help from a primitive human. With respect, sir, His Highness was stranded, separated from us, and apparently hungry. The human provided food and shelter. By any objective measure, that constitutes help." Nexus fell silent, considering this. The concept was foreign to him. In dragon culture, one did not help without expectation of return. Alliances were formed based on mutual benefit, not whatever this was. "Continue monitoring," he finally ordered, "and prepare a report for the Emperor. He'll want to know what's happening with his son." The next evening, Blake awoke to find Ember perched on his chest, staring at him with those unervingly intelligent eyes. "Morning to you too," Blake mumbled, gently moving the creature aside so he could sit up. "Or evening, I guess," Ember chirped, jumping off the bed and heading toward the kitchen with purposeful strides. "Hungry, huh?" Blake yawned, following him. "Let's see what we've got." He opened the refrigerator, surveying its meager contents. Some leftover Chinese food, half a carton of milk that was probably still good, and a package of chicken breasts he'd bought on sale. He pulled out the chicken, figuring it was the closest to what a reptile, or dragon, or whatever Ember was, might naturally eat. As he started preparing the chicken, he noticed Ember watching him intently, head tilted in what seemed like curiosity. "You know, I've been thinking," Blake said, talking to Ember as he often talked to his cats, not really expecting a response. "You're definitely not a lizard. Those wings, those scales. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're actually a dragon. Like a real dragon." Ember chirped, wings fluttering slightly. "But that's crazy, right? Dragons aren't real. They're myths. Fantasy." Blake frowned, flipping the chicken in the pan. "But then again, what do I know? Maybe dragons are real. Maybe they're aliens. Maybe you're an alien." Ember made a trilling sound that almost seemed like agreement. Blake laughed. "Oh sure, you're an alien dragon. And I'm the janitor who discovered first contact while taking out the trash at McDonald's." That would be something, wouldn't it? If Blake could have understood the language of the Imperial dragons, he would have known that Ember's next series of chirps and trills translated roughly to, "That is exactly what happened, you oblivious human." Instead, Blake just smiled, transferring the cooked chicken to a plate and setting it on the floor for Ember. "There you go, buddy. Better than McDonald's, right?" Ember approached the plate eagerly, but before he could take a bite, a sharp pain lanced through Blake's head. He gasped, staggering backward, hands clutching his temples. Images flashed through his mind. A vast starship, larger than anything humans had ever built. A throne room gleaming with gold and jewels. A massive dragon, scales black as night, eyes burning like twin suns, and a sense of overwhelming power and authority. As quickly as it came, the vision faded, leaving Blake leaning against the kitchen counter, breathing heavily. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, looking at Ember with new eyes. Ember, for his part, seemed unperturbed, happily devouring the chicken as if nothing had happened. Blake slid down to sit on the kitchen floor, mind racing. That wasn't just a random hallucination. It felt like communication. Like Ember had somehow placed those images in his head. "Who are you?" Blake asked softly. "What are you?" Ember finished his meal and looked up at Blake, eyes glowing more intensely than ever before. Then, deliberately, the small dragon approached and placed one clawed foot on Blake's knee. Another flash of images. Ember, but larger, standing beside the black dragon from the previous vision. Beings that looked like humanoid dragons, dressed in what appeared to be military uniforms. A vast fleet of spacecraft, and finally, Earth, viewed from space. You're really an alien," Blake breathed, astonishment giving way to a strange calm. "And not just any alien. You're someone important, aren't you?" Ember chirped, and though no more visions came, Blake somehow understood it as confirmation. "Well," he said after a long moment, "this complicates things." In the surveillance craft, alarms blared once more. "Sir," the technician called, urgency in his voice. "We've detected a telepathic transmission from His Highness to the human." Nexus nearly knocked over his command chair in his haste to reach the monitoring station. "What?" The prince initiated contact. "Yes, sir. Basic imagistic communication." "What did he reveal?" Nexus demanded, dread pooling in his stomach. If the prince had revealed sensitive information about the Empire to a human, the technician hesitated. "It's difficult to interpret precisely, sir, but it appears His Highness conveyed his royal status and possibly some information about our species." Nexus closed his eyes, exhaling a small jet of flame in frustration. "This is a diplomatic nightmare. The Council will have all our scales." He turned to Commander Valix. "We need to extract the prince now, before he reveals anything else." "But sir, the non-intervention protocols are already compromised," Nexus finished. "The prince has made telepathic contact. We have no choice but to proceed with extraction." "And the human?" Valix asked quietly. Nexus's expression hardened. "Standard procedure for compromised security. Memory wipe if possible. If not," he left the sentence unfinished, but Valix understood. Elimination was always an option. Blake spent his shift at McDonald's in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms while his mind raced with the implications of his discovery. Ember, or whatever his real name was, wasn't just an alien. He was royalty. the son of what appeared to be some kind of dragon emperor. And somehow, Blake Turner, a janitor whose greatest achievement to date was maintaining a 3-star rating on his rarely used Uber driver account, had become his caretaker. "Everything okay, Blake?" his manager asked as he nearly walked into a wall, mop in hand. "You seem distracted tonight." "Yeah, sorry," Blake mumbled. "Just didn't sleep well." Which was true, in a sense. After Ember's telepathic revelation, sleep had been impossible. Blake had spent hours researching dragons in mythology, then aliens in scientific literature, then conspiracy theories about government cover-ups of extraterrestrial contact. None of it had been particularly helpful, but it had kept him occupied until his shift. Now, as he finished cleaning the last bathroom and prepared to head home, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He kept seeing movements out of the corner of his eye, hearing sounds just at the edge of perception. When he stepped out into the parking lot after his shift, the feeling intensified. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and a chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Hello," he called, feeling foolish even as he did so. "Is someone there?" No response came, but as he reached his car, Blake noticed something odd. A small, metallic disc, no larger than a quarter, attached to the underside of his door handle. It hadn't been there when he arrived for his shift, he was certain. Cautiously, he reached out and touched it. The disc seemed to pulse with a faint, greenish light, and it was warm to the touch. "What the?" Blake began, but was cut off as a blinding light suddenly engulfed the parking lot. Shielding his eyes, Blake looked up to see the source of the illumination, and his jaw dropped. Hovering silently above the McDonald's was a craft unlike anything he'd ever seen. Sleek, black, with no visible engines or propellers, yet somehow maintaining perfect stability in the air. "Oh my God," Blake whispered, rooted to the spot as a beam of light shot down from the craft, touching the ground just a few feet away from him. Within the beam, shapes began to materialize. Humanoid figures, tall and imposing, with reptilian features that reminded Blake unmistakably of Ember. They wore what appeared to be armor, black and gleaming, with insignias Blake didn't recognize emblazoned on their chests. And they were all staring directly at him. The tallest of the figures stepped forward, golden eyes fixed on Blake with an intensity that made him want to run. But his legs refused to cooperate. "Human," the figure spoke, its voice a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate the air itself. "You have something that belongs to us." Blake swallowed hard, mind racing. They were here for Ember. Of course they were. But how did they know? How had they found him? I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, playing for time. The dragon-like being's eyes narrowed, and a small jet of flame escaped its nostrils. "Do not attempt deception. Our sensors have tracked the prince to your dwelling. You will return him to us immediately." "The prince," Blake echoed, feigning confusion despite the cold dread settling in his stomach. "Prince Dracos, heir to the galactic dragon empire." The being clarified, impatience evident in its tone. "The young dragonling you removed from this establishment's waste disposal unit." "Ember," Blake said softly. "His name is Ember." The dragon being snorted, another small flame briefly illuminating the night. "The prince's name is Dracos. And you, human, have interfered in matters beyond your comprehension. Hand him over, and perhaps the Emperor will be merciful when deciding Earth's fate." Blake's heart skipped a beat. "Earth's fate? What do you mean?" "Your planet is under evaluation for potential inclusion in the Galactic Alliance," the being explained, as if talking to a child. "But the kidnapping of the Imperial heir is an act of aggression that cannot be overlooked." "Kidnapping?" Blake sputtered. "I didn't kidnap anyone. I found him in a dumpster, starving. I was helping him." The dragon being tilted its head, a gesture so reminiscent of Ember that Blake felt a pang of recognition. "Helping?" the being echoed, sounding genuinely puzzled. "Without expectation of reward or advantage." "Yes, helping," Blake insisted. "Because that's what decent people do when they find someone, or something, in need." The being turned to one of its companions, speaking in a language Blake couldn't understand. a series of clicks, growls, and musical trills. The conversation seemed heated, with several of the beings gesturing emphatically. Finally, the leader turned back to Blake. "I am General Nexus of the Imperial Dragon Forces. You will take us to the prince immediately." It wasn't a request. Blake hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He's at my apartment. But you're all a bit conspicuous. Your ship too. Won't people notice?" Nexus made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Our vessel and ourselves are equipped with perception filters. Only those we wish to see us can see us." "So I'm special?" Blake asked, unable to keep the incredulity from his voice. "You are relevant to our mission," Nexus corrected. "Nothing more. Now, take us to the prince." Blake hesitated. "And what happens after?" "To me, I mean." Nexus's expression revealed nothing. "That depends on the prince's condition and your cooperation." Not exactly reassuring, Blake thought. "Fine," he said aloud. "Follow me. Or, do you want to ride in your ship?" "We will follow in our vessel," Nexus stated. "You will proceed in your primitive transport. Any deviation from the direct path to your dwelling will be interpreted as hostile action." "Right. No pressure," Blake muttered, climbing into his car. As he drove home, the invisible alien spacecraft hovering somewhere above him, Blake couldn't help but wonder if he'd somehow stumbled into the plot of a science fiction movie. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been making rent. Now, he was involved in an interstellar diplomatic incident. Life, Blake decided, had a strange sense of humor. When Blake pulled into his apartment complex's parking lot, he half expected to see the alien spacecraft landing on the roof. Instead, when he got out of his car, Nexus and 2 other dragon beings simply appeared beside him, as if they'd been there all along. "Your dwelling?" Nexus prompted, gesturing toward the building. "3rd floor," Blake confirmed, leading the way. He tried to imagine what his neighbors would think if they could see him leading a group of 7-foot-tall reptilian aliens up the stairs. Probably that he needed to cut back on the late-night shifts. Outside his apartment door, Blake paused. "Listen, before we go in, I just want to make something clear. I didn't know Prince Dracos, was your prince. I just thought he was some kind of exotic animal someone had abandoned. I was trying to help." Nexus regarded him with those unnerving golden eyes. "Your intentions will be evaluated by higher authorities than myself, human. Open the door." Blake sighed, then unlocked his apartment. As soon as the door swung open, a blur of iridescent scales shot across the room, leaping into the air and chirping excitedly. Prince Dracos flew directly to Nexus, hovering before the general's face and trilling rapidly in that strange language Blake couldn't understand. Nexus and the other dragon beings seemed shocked, their rigid postures suddenly slackening as they listened to the prince's communication. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, Nexus turned to Blake, his expression unreadable. "The prince has explained the situation," he said slowly. "It seems our initial assessment was incomplete." Blake raised an eyebrow. Meaning, Nexus continued, "that Prince Dracos confirms your account. He escaped our ship of his own volition, became stranded, and you provided assistance without knowledge of his identity." Nexus paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "The prince also insists that you have treated him with kindness." The way Nexus said the word kindness made it sound like an alien concept, which, Blake realized, it might well be to these beings. "Well, yeah," Blake said, shrugging. "He was hungry and alone. Of course I helped him." Prince Dracos chirped again, landing on Blake's shoulder and nuzzling against his cheek affectionately. "The prince appears to have developed an attachment to you," one of the other dragon beings observed, sounding perplexed. "We've bonded," Blake said simply. "That happens when you share your home with someone, even if they're from another planet." Prince Dracos trilled, then flew back to hover in front of Nexus, communicating rapidly once more. Nexus's eyes widened. "Your Highness, that is highly irregular. The protocols specifically state." The prince interrupted with a sharp chirp, his small form seeming to grow more imposing despite his size. Nexus bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Highness." Blake looked between them, confusion evident on his face. What's going on? Nexus straightened, fixing Blake with a stern gaze. Prince Dracos has made a most unusual request. He wishes for you to accompany us back to the Imperial flagship. What? Blake blinked. Why? He believes you would make an excellent representative of humanity in our ongoing evaluation process, Nexus explained, not sounding particularly thrilled about it. Additionally, Nexus hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. He says he would miss you if he left without you. Blake stared at the small dragon perched now on his coffee table, those intelligent eyes regarding him expectantly. You want me to go to space with you? Blake asked, addressing Prince Dracos directly. The prince chirped affirmatively. But I have a job, a life here. Even as he said it, Blake realized how hollow it sounded. His job was mopping floors at McDonald's. His life consisted of caring for stray cats and watching Netflix. Was he really turning down the opportunity to travel to the stars? The absence would be temporary, Nexus clarified. A diplomatic exchange lasting no more than one Earth rotation cycle. After which, you would be returned here, with appropriate compensation for your time. Compensation. The Empire rewards those who assist the royal family. Even humans. Blake looked around his small, shabby apartment. At his cats, who were watching the proceedings with typical feline indifference. At his life, which had been going nowhere particular until a small dragon had fallen into it. When do we leave? He asked. Prince Dracos chirped happily, flying circles around Blake's head. Nexus checked a device on his wrist that looked something like a futuristic watch. Immediately, the Emperor awaits his son's return. Blake swallowed hard. The Emperor. Right. He glanced at his cats. I need someone to feed my cats while I'm gone. Nexus made a gesture, and one of the other dragon beings stepped forward. A caretaker drone will be assigned to maintain your dwelling and attend to your feline companions during your absence. A drone? Like a robot? Essentially, yes. Blake nodded slowly, trying to process it all. Okay, let me just pack a bag. Unnecessary, Nexus stated. All required provisions will be supplied aboard the flagship. Right? Of course. Blake took a deep breath. I guess I'm ready then. As he followed Nexus and the others out of his apartment, Prince Dracos perched contentedly on his shoulder. Blake couldn't help but marvel at the strange turn his life had taken. From McDonald's janitor to intergalactic diplomat in less than a week. All because he'd taken the time to feed a starving dragon hatchling. The journey to the Imperial flagship took less time than Blake's usual commute to McDonald's. One moment, they were standing in the parking lot of his apartment complex. The next, they were enveloped in a beam of light. And then Blake found himself in a vast hangar bay that defied human architecture. Whoa, he breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. The ceiling arched hundreds of feet above them, glittering with lights that seemed to float in midair. The walls pulsed with energy, lines of blue and gold flowing like rivers through metallic surfaces. And everywhere Blake looked, there were dragons, some in humanoid form like Nexus, others in full dragon form, ranging from the size of horses to creatures so massive they could have swallowed Blake's entire apartment building. Welcome to the Imperial flagship Eternal Flame, Nexus announced, not bothering to hide the pride in his voice. The mightiest vessel in the Dragon Empire's fleet. Prince Dracos chirped excitedly from Blake's shoulder, tiny wings fluttering with what seemed like pride. It's incredible, Blake admitted, genuinely awestruck. How long has it been orbiting Earth? This vessel arrived in your solar system approximately 3 of your Earth months ago, Nexus explained. Part of the evaluation process for potential inclusion in the Galactic Alliance. And how's that evaluation going? Blake couldn't help but ask. Nexus's expression darkened slightly. That is not for me to say. The Diplomatic Council makes such determinations. He gestured toward a corridor leading from the hangar. This way, the Emperor awaits. Blake swallowed hard, suddenly very aware that he was about to meet the ruler of an interstellar empire while wearing his McDonald's uniform, complete with grease stains and a small tear in the left sleeve. Maybe I should have changed clothes after all, he muttered. Prince Dracos trilled softly, head-butting Blake's cheek in what seemed like reassurance. The Emperor cares little for human fashion, Nexus stated flatly. Your appearance is irrelevant. Your actions regarding the prince are what matter. That wasn't exactly comforting. As they traversed the corridors of the eternal flame, Blake felt increasingly out of place. Everything was built on a scale that made him feel like a child, from the towering doorways to the massive pieces of furniture they occasionally passed. The few dragon beings they encountered stared at him with mixtures of curiosity, disdain, and in some cases, what appeared to be thinly veiled hostility. Not popular with the locals, am I? Blake remarked after a particularly venomous glare from a dragon being wearing what looked like elaborate ceremonial armor. Humans are controversial among our kind, Nexus admitted. Some view your species as promising allies. Others see you as dangerous primitives best left to develop in isolation. The prince's adventure has only intensified the debate. Great, Blake sighed. So I'm walking into a political firestorm. Indeed, Nexus agreed, not bothering with false reassurance. The Emperor will determine whether your actions constitute aid to the imperial family, which would be viewed favorably, or interference in imperial affairs, which would not. Blake grimaced. And what happens if it's the latter? Nexus didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Finally, they reached an enormous set of doors, easily 50 feet tall, carved from what appeared to be a single piece of material that resembled obsidian but gleamed with an inner fire, like embers. Prince Dracos's scales. Two massive dragons flanked the doors, their scales a deep burgundy, eyes glowing like embers. They straightened as Nexus approached, wings folding tightly against their bodies in what Blake assumed was a salute. General Nexus, one rumbled, voice so deep Blake felt it in his chest. The Emperor has been informed of your arrival with the prince and the human. The way the guard said human made it sound like cockroach, but Blake kept his expression neutral. Nexus nodded. We seek immediate audience. Granted, the guard responded, and both dragons placed their claws on the massive doors, which swung open silently despite their apparent weight. Prince Dracos chirped excitedly, launching himself from Blake's shoulder and flying through the doors ahead of them. Your Highness, protocol dictates. Nexus began, but it was too late. The prince had already disappeared into the throne room beyond. Nexus sighed, a small jet of flame escaping his nostrils. Follow me, human, and remember your place. Speak only when addressed directly by His Imperial Majesty. Got it, Blake nodded, wiping suddenly sweaty palms on his uniform pants. Don't speak unless spoken to. Easy enough. As they passed through the doors, Blake's jaw dropped for the second time since arriving on the flagship. The throne room was beyond anything he could have imagined, a cathedral-like space that seemed to extend for acres, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow and mist. Columns of what appeared to be crystallized fire supported arches of gleaming metal, and the floor beneath his feet was polished to such a shine that it perfectly reflected the thousands of floating lights that illuminated the chamber. And at the far end, atop a dais of stepped obsidian, sat the most magnificent creature Blake had ever seen. The Emperor of the Galactic Dragon Empire was easily the size of a commercial airliner, his scales so black they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The only exceptions were the veins of molten gold that ran like rivers between the scales, pulsing with each breath the massive dragon took. His wings, partially folded against his back, could have engulfed Blake's entire apartment building, and his eyes, two orbs of pure golden fire, fixed immediately on the human as he entered. Before the Emperor's throne, Prince Dracos hovered, chirping and trilling in their draconic language, occasionally gesturing back toward Blake with his tail or wings. As Blake and Nexus approached, the prince's communication grew more animated, until finally, the Emperor raised one massive claw, silencing his son. So, the Emperor spoke, his voice like rolling thunder, yet perfectly understandable to Blake's ears. This is the human who found my son. Blake swallowed hard, remembering Nexus's instruction to speak only when directly addressed. Was that a direct address? He decided to err on the side of caution and remained silent, giving a small bow instead. The Emperor's massive head tilted slightly. You may speak, human. My son has told me much about you already, but I would hear your account of events. Blake straightened, acutely aware that his future, possibly the future of Earth itself, might depend on what he said next. Your Majesty, he began, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. I found your son, Prince Dracos, in a waste disposal unit behind the restaurant where I work. He appeared hungry and alone, so I provided food and later shelter. I had no idea who or what he was, only that he needed help. Where I come from, helping those in need it's just what we do. The Emperor's eyes narrowed fractionally. You claim you aided my son with no knowledge of potential reward? No expectation of advantage. Yes, Your Majesty, Blake confirmed. I just wanted to help. The Emperor rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that made the entire chamber vibrate. Curious. In my experience, sentient beings rarely act without self-interest. His massive head swung toward Nexus. General, is the human's account consistent with your findings? Nexus stepped forward, dropping to one knee. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. Our surveillance confirms the human's claims. He provided sustenance and shelter to the prince without apparent knowledge of His Highness's identity. The Emperor's attention returned to Blake, those burning eyes studying him with unsettling intensity. Tell me, human, what is your designation? My name is Blake Turner, Your Majesty. And what is your function within human society, Blake Turner? Blake hesitated, suddenly very conscious of his humble position. I'm a janitor, Your Majesty. I cleaned the restaurant where I found your son. A sanitation worker, the Emperor mused. Not a warrior, scientist, or ruler. No, Your Majesty. Just an ordinary guy. The Emperor made a sound that might have been a laugh, a rumbling that sent small cascades of dust falling from the distant ceiling. Yet you took it upon yourself to care for the heir to the greatest empire this galaxy has ever known. The massive dragon leaned forward slightly, bringing his head closer to Blake. Why? Blake met those fiery eyes, finding courage he didn't know he had. Because he needed help. That's reason enough. The throne room fell silent, save for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Even Prince Dracos seemed to be holding his breath, hovering motionless between his father and Blake. Finally, the Emperor spoke. In 10,000 years of ruling the Dragon Empire, I have encountered countless species across the stars. Many technologically superior to humans. Many physically stronger. Many with abilities your kind can only dream of. He paused, those golden eyes boring into Blake. Yet few have demonstrated the quality you have shown my son. Blake blinked, confused. Quality, Your Majesty? Compassion without calculation, the Emperor clarified. You had nothing to gain and potentially much to lose by taking in a creature unknown to you. Yet you did so without hesitation. The massive dragon settled back on his throne. This quality is rare and valuable. Prince Dracos chirped excitedly, performing an aerial loop before landing on Blake's shoulder once more. My son has grown quite attached to you, the Emperor observed. He tells me you named him Ember during his stay with you. Blake felt his cheeks flush. I didn't know his real name, Your Majesty. I thought it suited him because of how his scales sometimes glow. Ember. The Emperor tested the name, smoke curling from his nostrils. It is not without merit, as human designations go. From his shoulder, Prince Dracos chirped happily, head-butting Blake's cheek again. It seems my son agrees, the Emperor noted, amusement evident in his tone. He has requested that you be permitted to continue using this designation when addressing him informally. Blake glanced at the small dragon on his shoulder, who trilled affirmatively. I'd be honored, Your Majesty. The Emperor's attention shifted to Nexus. General, what is the status of the Diplomatic Council's deliberations regarding Earth? Nexus straightened, his expression grave. Deadlocked, Your Imperial Majesty. The Council remains divided on whether humans are ready for inclusion in the Alliance. The conservative faction, led by Lord Pyrrhus, continues to argue that humans are too unpredictable, too prone to violence and irrational behavior. And the progressive faction? Led by Lady Seraphina, they point to human creativity, adaptability, and potential for growth. They believe humans would make valuable allies, given proper guidance. The Emperor rumbled thoughtfully. And what does Lord Pyrrhus say of my son's adventure among humans? Nexus hesitated. He suggests it was a calculated plot by human intelligence services to gain leverage over the Empire. Blake couldn't help himself. What? That's ridiculous. I'm a janitor, not a spy. The Emperor's eyes swiveled back to Blake, and he realized he'd spoken out of turn. Sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to interrupt. To Blake's surprise, the Emperor made that rumbling laugh sound again. Your indignation speaks to your honesty, Blake Turner. Fear not. I do not share Lord Pyrrhus's paranoia regarding your species. The massive dragon shifted on his throne. However, the Council's approval is required for Earth's inclusion in the Alliance, and Lord Pyrrhus holds significant influence. Prince Dracos suddenly launched from Blake's shoulder, flying up to hover directly before his father's massive face. The small dragon trilled and chirped rapidly, occasionally gesturing back toward Blake. The Emperor listened intently, occasionally rumbling in response. Finally, Prince Dracos settled on the arm of his father's throne, looking quite pleased with himself. My son has made an interesting proposal, the Emperor announced. He suggests that you, Blake Turner, should address the diplomatic council directly. Share your perspective as an ordinary human who has demonstrated the qualities we value in potential allies. Blake's eyes widened. Me? Address an alien council? Your Majesty, I'm not a diplomat or a politician. I don't know anything about interstellar politics. That, the Emperor stated, is precisely why my son believes you would be effective. You represent humanity in its natural state, unpolished by diplomatic training or political ambition. The massive dragon leaned forward again. The council convenes in 1 hour. You have until then to prepare. It wasn't a request. Blake was given a small chamber to refresh himself before the council meeting, though there wasn't much he could do about his McDonald's uniform. A dragon being who introduced himself as Talon, apparently assigned as Blake's guide, provided a brief overview of the diplomatic council and its function. The council consists of 12 representatives from the most influential species within the Galactic Alliance, Talon explained, his voice clipped and formal. They evaluate all potential new members, making recommendations to the Emperor, who has final authority. And they're deadlocked about Earth? Blake asked, pacing nervously. Indeed. 6 favor inclusion, 6 oppose. Lord Pyrrhus leads the opposition. He is not fond of mammals in general, and has particular concerns about human unpredictability. Great, Blake muttered. So I just need to convince a dragon who hates mammals that humans are predictable and trustworthy. Talon's expression remained neutral. I would focus on demonstrating why the qualities you showed in caring for Prince Dracos make humans valuable allies. The prince believes in you. That counts for something. Blake stopped pacing, struck by the sincerity in Talon's voice. You care about him. About Prince Dracos. Talon's formal demeanor cracked slightly. I have served as His Highness's tutor since he hatched. He is special, not just because of his royal blood, but because of his nature. He sees value where others see only weakness. The dragon being straightened, composure returning. It is time. The council awaits. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less impressive. Arranged in a semicircle were 12 ornate seats, each occupied by a being so alien that Blake had to force himself not to stare. Some resembled dragons. Others were completely different. Crystalline entities that glowed from within, beings that seemed composed entirely of living flame, and creatures so bizarre Blake's mind could barely process their forms. At the center of the semicircle stood a raised platform, currently empty, which Talon indicated was where Blake would stand to address the council. Behind this platform, on a higher dais, sat the Emperor, with Prince Dracos perched on the arm of his throne, watching proceedings with evident interest. As Blake entered, all conversation ceased, and 12 pairs of alien eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and in one case, unmistakable hostility. Blake didn't need to ask which one was Lord Pyrrhus, the dragon being with scales the color of dried blood, whose golden eyes narrowed to slits at Blake's approach. Members of the diplomatic council. The Emperor's voice rumbled through the chamber. Before you stands Blake Turner, a human from the planet Earth. He is neither a diplomat nor a leader among his kind, but an ordinary citizen whose actions regarding my son have brought him to our attention. I have granted him the right to address this council regarding Earth's petition for alliance membership. Lord Pyrrhus rose immediately, his posture rigid with indignation. Your Imperial Majesty, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. This human has no official standing. He cannot speak for his species or his government. He speaks by my authority, Lord Pyrrhus, the Emperor replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. Unless you wish to challenge that authority? Lord Pyrrhus bowed stiffly. Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely express concern about the precedent this sets. Your concern is noted, the Emperor said dismissively. Blake Turner, you may address the council. Blake took a deep breath and stepped onto the platform. He had spent the past hour trying to think of some grand, diplomatic speech, but in the end, he'd realized Talon was right. His value was in his ordinariness, in representing humanity as it truly was, not as it might present itself in formal diplomatic channels. Members of the council, he began, his voice steadier than he felt. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. As the Emperor said, I'm not a diplomat or a leader. Until a week ago, my biggest concern was making rent on my apartment. I clean floors and take out trash at a fast food restaurant. I'm about as ordinary as humans get. He paused, glancing up at Prince Dracos, who chirped encouragingly. When I found Prince Dracos, or Ember, as I called him, I didn't know he was royalty. I didn't know he was an alien. I just saw a small creature that was hungry and alone, and I couldn't walk away. Not because I thought I'd get something out of it, but because it was the right thing to do. Lord Pyrrhus snorted, a small jet of flame briefly illuminating his section of the chamber. A touching anecdote, but hardly representative of your species' typical behavior. Humans have a well-documented history of violence, xenophobia, and environmental destruction. Blake nodded slowly. You're not wrong. Humans have done terrible things throughout our history. We've fought wars, destroyed habitats, hurt each other in countless ways. He looked directly at Lord Pyrrhus. But that's not the whole story. For every act of cruelty in our history, there are thousands of small kindnesses that never make it into the history books. People helping strangers, protecting the vulnerable, choosing compassion over advantage. He turned, addressing the entire council now. I don't know what criteria you use to judge whether a species is ready to join your alliance. Maybe you look at our technology, which I'm guessing is pretty primitive compared to yours. Maybe you look at our governments, which, yeah, are far from perfect. Maybe you look at our history, which is messy and violent and sometimes shameful. Blake straightened, finding confidence in the simple truth of what he was saying. But if you're looking for a species that understands the value of compassion, of helping those who need it regardless of what you get in return, then humans are ready. We may not be the strongest or the smartest, but we know how to care. We know how to help. And from what I've seen of the galaxy so far, that's a quality worth having in your alliance. The chamber fell silent. Even Lord Pyrrhus seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Blake glanced up at Prince Dracos, who was practically vibrating with excitement on his perch. Finally, a being composed of what appeared to be living crystal rose from her seat. When she spoke, her voice chimed like bells. I am Lady Seraphina, human Blake. Your words echo what I have long argued regarding your species. Beneath your technological limitations and political divisions lies a capacity for empathy that is remarkable. She turned to her fellow council members. The human speaks truth. His actions regarding the prince were not calculated, but instinctive. This quality of spontaneous compassion is precisely what gives humans their unique value. Lord Pyrrhus rose again, scales flushed darker with agitation. One human's actions cannot erase the concerns about their species as a whole. They are unpredictable, fractious, prone to violence, and capable of great kindness, Lady Seraphina interrupted, as this human has demonstrated. A single example, Lord Pyrrhus began, is sometimes all we need. The Emperor's voice cut through the chamber like thunder. I have observed humans for centuries. They are indeed all that you claim, Lord Pyrrhus, unpredictable, emotional, sometimes violent. They are also, as Lady Seraphina and Blake Turner have stated, capable of remarkable compassion. The massive dragon's eyes swept the council. The alliance was not formed only of species that think and act as we do. Its strength lies in diversity, of thought, of ability, of perspective. Prince Dracos chirped and trilled, flying down from his perch to land on Blake's shoulder once more. The message couldn't have been clearer. My son, the Emperor continued, who will one day rule after me, has made his position clear. He believes humans, with all their flaws and virtues, belong in the alliance. His experience with Blake Turner has convinced him of this. The Emperor's burning gaze fixed on Lord Pyrrhus. I am inclined to agree with my son. Lord Pyrrhus bowed stiffly. Your Majesty, I have served the Empire faithfully for centuries. My concerns come not from prejudice, but from caution. Caution is valued, old friend, the Emperor acknowledged. But so is growth. The alliance must evolve, or it will stagnate. The massive dragon straightened on his throne. I call for a vote. Those in favor of recommending Earth for provisional alliance membership, signify. Lady Seraphina's crystalline hand rose immediately, followed by 5 others. Lord Pyrrhus and his 5 allies kept their appendages firmly down. A tie, Lord Pyrrhus noted, satisfaction evident in his voice. The status quo remains. Not quite, the Emperor rumbled. In cases of deadlock, Alliance Charter grants the Emperor casting vote. His burning eyes met Blake's. I vote in favor. Earth will be offered provisional membership in the Galactic Alliance, effective immediately. Prince Dracos chirped joyously, performing an aerial loop around Blake's head before settling back on his shoulder. Blake stood stunned, the full implications of what had just happened slowly sinking in. I thank you, Your Majesty, he finally managed, bowing deeply. Earth won't let you down. See that it doesn't, Lord Pyrrhus muttered, rising from his seat. The probationary period is still in effect. One wrong move, and this decision can be reversed. As the council members filed out, some nodding respectfully to Blake, others ignoring him entirely, Blake turned to Prince Dracos. Did that just happen? Did I just help get Earth into some kind of galactic United Nations? Prince Dracos chirped affirmatively, looking immensely pleased with himself. Blake Turner. The Emperor's voice drew his attention back to the throne. Approach. Blake moved forward, Prince Dracos still perched on his shoulder. You have served the imperial family well, the Emperor stated. Such service merits reward. What would you ask of me? Blake blinked, caught off guard. I don't need a reward, Your Majesty. I was just helping him, Prince Dracos. The Emperor made that rumbling laugh sound again. Your response confirms my judgment. Nevertheless, service to the crown must be acknowledged. The massive dragon leaned forward. I offer you a position, Blake Turner. Earth will need a liaison to the Alliance, someone who understands both human and galactic perspectives, someone who has demonstrated the best qualities of humanity. Blake's jaw dropped. Me? But I'm just a janitor. You are the human who cared for my son without expectation of reward, the Emperor corrected. The human who helped secure Earth's place in the Alliance. The human my son trusts. The great dragon's eyes gleamed. Unless you prefer to return to cleaning your McDonald's? Prince Dracos chirped insistently in Blake's ear, headbutting his cheek. I think he's telling me to say yes, Blake chuckled. My son has always had good judgment, the Emperor observed. Do you accept? Blake thought about his life back on Earth. His tiny apartment. His dead-end job. His loneliness, alleviated only by the company of stray cats and, briefly, one alien prince. Then he thought about the stars, the countless worlds he might see, the difference he might make. "Yes," he said firmly. "I accept, Your Majesty." The Emperor nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. "It is settled, then. You will return to Earth to put your affairs in order, then report to the diplomatic compound we will establish in your region. Prince Dracos will accompany you as your—" "What is the human term?" "Roommate." Blake laughed, the absurdity of it all finally hitting him. "Roommate." "Yes, Your Majesty." Prince Dracos chirped happily, rubbing his head against Blake's cheek. "One condition, though," Blake added, surprising himself with his boldness. "My cats come with us. All three of them." The Emperor's eyes narrowed fractionally. Then he made that rumbling laugh sound once more. "The feline companions the prince has told me of? Very well. They too shall have a place in the diplomatic compound." Prince Dracos trilled excitedly, performing another aerial loop around Blake's head. "I believe my son approves," the Emperor observed dryly. 3 days later, Blake stood in his apartment one last time, surveying the few possessions he was taking with him. His cats were already at the newly established diplomatic compound, a sprawling facility that had seemingly appeared overnight on what had previously been an empty lot outside the city. Prince Dracos, or Ember, as Blake still called him in private, perched on the kitchen counter, watching Blake with those intelligent eyes. "Ready for our new adventure?" Blake asked, closing his suitcase. Ember chirped affirmatively, wings fluttering with excitement. Blake smiled, shaking his head in wonder at how drastically his life had changed. 1 week ago, he'd been a janitor at McDonald's, living paycheck to paycheck. Now he was Earth's first official liaison to the Galactic Alliance, with an alien prince as his roommate. All because he'd taken the time to feed a hungry creature he'd found in a dumpster. "You know," Blake said, as Ember flew over to perch on his shoulder, "I never did put in my official notice at McDonald's. My manager is going to be pretty confused when I don't show up for my shift tonight." Ember made a trilling sound that was unmistakably laughter. "Yeah, I guess that's not really important in the grand scheme of things," Blake agreed, picking up his suitcase. "Still, maybe we should stop by on our way to the compound. I should at least tell them I quit." Ember chirped his agreement, settling comfortably on Blake's shoulder as they headed for the door. Blake paused at the threshold, looking back at the small apartment that had been his home for the past 5 years. It wasn't much, but it had been his. And in a strange way, it had been the starting point for something extraordinary. "Thanks for getting stuck in that dumpster," Blake said to Ember, scratching the small dragon under his chin. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Ember trilled softly, head-butting Blake's cheek affectionately. Together, the McDonald's janitor and the alien prince stepped out into the sunlight, heading toward a future neither of them could have imagined just 1 week ago. A future where compassion had built a bridge between worlds, and where the simple act of feeding a hungry creature had changed the course of human history. As Blake's car pulled away from the apartment complex for the last time, the cloaked Imperial surveillance craft that had been monitoring them disengaged its stealth field briefly, sun glinting off its sleek black hull before it vanished into the blue Earth sky. On board, General Nexus watched Blake's car grow smaller on the monitor. "Transmit final report to Imperial Command," he ordered. "Operation Dragonfall complete. Earth's integration proceeding as planned." His second-in-command nodded. "And the human?" Nexus's expression softened, just slightly. "Blake Turner has proven himself worthy of the honor bestowed upon him. I believe he will serve the Alliance well." He paused, then added something he never thought he'd say about a human. "He has a good heart." In the car below, unaware of the craft tracking their journey, Blake glanced at Ember, who was watching the scenery flash by with evident delight. "So," Blake said casually, "when were you planning to tell me you can transform into a humanoid form like the other dragons?" Ember's head whipped around, eyes wide with surprise. Blake laughed. "Your father mentioned it when we were saying goodbye. Said something about you being old enough to begin practicing your transformations." He raised an eyebrow. "Were you just pretending to be a helpless hatchling this whole time?" Ember chirped innocently, but there was a mischievous glint in his eye that told Blake everything he needed to know. "You little con artist," Blake chuckled, shaking his head. You could have just asked for help, you know. Ember trilled, a sound Blake had come to recognize as laughter, and flew from the passenger seat to perch on Blake's shoulder, nuzzling against his cheek affectionately. Yeah, I love you too, you sneaky dragon. Blake smiled, turning the car toward the McDonald's where it had all begun. But you're buying lunch from now on. I know your family's loaded. As Blake pulled into the McDonald's parking lot, he felt a strange sense of completion. The circle was closing. One chapter ending, another beginning. And as he walked through those familiar doors one last time, Prince Dracos of the Galactic Dragon Empire perched on his shoulder. Blake Turner, former janitor, current diplomat, couldn't help but smile at the absurdity and wonder of it all. Life, he decided, had a much better sense of humor than he'd ever given it credit for. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.